one thing I think has become very clear, at least since October 7th, that the head of the snake of war and terrorism in the region actually lies in Tehran. So what do you do with the head of the snake? You crush it.
We have talked for years about some of the illicit activities of the Iranian government here on U.S. soil. There have been numerous cases where they have tried to hire criminals to engage in activities here, whether it be assassinations or terror attacks, et cetera, et cetera. Another one has arisen, this one in the state of Maryland. And according to the court documents from the state of Minnesota, 3 individuals were arrested, engaged in another plot. Can you tell us about this plot that was supposedly designed to essentially go after individuals in the state of Maryland?
Right. Well, according to the indictment by the Justice Department, the Iranian regime, through a network that it has inside Iran, they name actually one particular person. His name is Naji Sharifi Zindashti. He's based in Iran, runs a network associated with the Iranian regime's government. But out of Iran, he had hired 2 individuals in Canadian nationals to come to the United States to carry out a terror operation against 2 Iranian dissidents in Maryland. And then he was doing all of these recruitment via encrypted communications through a network called the Sky ECC. And then he had promised to pay these individuals as much as $350,000 plus $20,000 for their travel expenses. In other words, just sitting in Tehran, the regime was able to hire individuals to carry out terror operations on U.S. soil. And of course, this one was neutralized, and there has been a trend of similar terror plots in the past.
Do we know anything more about where in Maryland these individuals resided, or not specifically their home addresses or anything, but do we know what locations? Were they closer to Baltimore, closer to DC? What do we know about the state of Maryland?
Well, the only thing that you know from the indictment papers, it just says they were residing in Maryland. It doesn't have any more details. However, it does specify that one of the individuals was clearly an Iranian national, or who came from Iran, who was a dissident, and his wife was the second person that was a target. And they didn't provide any other details as to the information about their locations or their job or their activities, other than saying that they were opposed to the Iranian regime. I guess that's really all that matters.
Yeah, it is at this stage, because we don't want to expose these individuals, these innocent folks and their families, to anything. What do you know about these individuals that were suspects? Have they been captured? Have they been arrested? What's the situation there?
Yes, well, these 2 Canadian nationals, they have a track record in criminal activities. Some were engaged in other, killing and murder activities, already jailed, with that kind of a background. And then these are actually the best places, the best people for the Iranian regime to hire, because they have the background involved in criminal activities. Plus, I mean, no one will pay attention that these guys who were involved, let's say, in drug trafficking or other criminal activities, would actually be hired by a foreign government. And that's why these individuals. One of them was only 40 in his 20s, I think. The 29 years old. and the other one is 43 years old, both Canadian nationals. That's all the information that was provided. But interestingly, one of them belonged to a bike club, and the regime reached out to that person who then hired the next person. So this way, the Iranian agent out of Iran was only dealing with one person on encrypted communication, using his resources, his network, to hire other criminals. And even the payment would go through that channel. So this way, the regime can actually protect as much information and vulnerabilities as possible. And that seems to be the trend that they had used in the past few years, that especially after the Iran regime's agents who were Iranian nationals or people who were officials of the Iran regime were caught carrying out terrorist activities. It was very costly for the Iran regime. One case was, you reported actually back in 2018, in summer of 2018, an Iranian diplomat based in Vienna, Asadullah Asadi, he brought a powerful bomb from Iran to Vienna on a diplomatic pouch, then gave it to two other culprits in another country, in Luxembourg, who were supposed to drive to Paris with another culprit carrying out the terror operation there. Of course, everybody were all arrested right before the event went on, and there were trial in court cases, extensive trial, and for the first time, an Iranian official diplomat was convicted of terrorism, sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment, and just mid last year, after serving 5 years of his 20 years, he was returned back to Iran by the Belgian government in a quid pro quo. And another case was actually right here in the United States in 2018, again, in August of 2018, that two Iranian nationals, one of them was actually also an American citizen who was based in Iran, but came here to hire another Iranian national who was also a US person. And they were plotting to what the Justice Department said, part of the capture and kill operations. And of course, my name was one of the people mentioned in that indictment. And thank God they were, arrested and they confessed and they were jailed. So after those direct ties to the regime were involved, the regime is resorting more and relying more on foreign nationals.
So we kind of got off track there, but let's make sure people understand. You mentioned that your name was mentioned in the indictment. Your name was not mentioned in the indictment as a suspect, but you were one of the victims. Let's be clear. That's correct, right?
Yes, exactly. The indictment makes it very clear that these two agents were looking to target officials of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, specifically here, our office here. And one of the people that they were targeting was, of course, myself. And, because he actually mentions that because I exposed the major nuclear sites of Iran, including Natanz, and that's part of the indictment. Obviously, the Iran regime has had a trend of targeting its Iranian dissidents, the same way that was the case in Paris.
So Iran has taken this route, taken this tactic to trying to go after people, to assassinate them, to capture them in the U.S. And in the cases of captures, they want to bring them back to Iran to go to do whatever. We don't know what they would do, to imprison or kill them there. Why do you suppose Iran is so bent on doing this?
Well, the Iranian regime is in big trouble, honestly speaking, inside the country. At least since 2017, there have been major rounds of demonstrations, uprising nationwide, people calling for regime change. And what the regime is so concerned about is the engine behind these protests, those who can move the protest, levels up and eventually lead to the fall of the Iran regime. So that's why, especially since 2017, 2018, the regime has been focused on targeting Iranian opposition leaders outside of Iran, in addition to what they're doing inside the country. This is all about the survival of the regime. The regime needs to target this opposition to make him ineffective or create fear among the Iranian population that if you speak up, if you're engaged in the overthrow of the Iran regime, you're going to be targeted. And I think this is the other side of the coin to what we see now in the region, their terrorism. Why does the regime step up terrorism? Because it's for their survival. They're in trouble domestically. They want to deviate attention. They want to maintain power. That's why they rely on their proxies in the region. It's the same mentality behind hiring foreign nationals to carry out terror attacks against dissidents.
Alireza, the U.S. is in the process of formulating what President Biden says is a response to the killing of 3 U.S. troops and the wounding of more than 40 earlier in the week, actually over the weekend, in northeast Jordan by a drone that was launched by a militant or militia group that is sponsored and essentially controlled by the government of Iran. And so we don't know what the U.S.'s plan is yet, how they're going to do this, but they say that at a time and a place of our choosing, we will respond. So what is it that the U.S. can do that will get the Iranian regime's attention?
Well, what gets the Iran regime's attention is firmness and decisiveness. It's accountability. They need to feel that what they have done, they are actually paying the price for it. Unfortunately, over the past several decades, I should say, the Iran regime has always gotten away with their terrorism, or even worse, they've been rewarded for their terrorism. You know, the hostage taking has turned into a very profitable business for the Iran regime. They just got $6 billion for getting 5 American hostages released. This has been a trend that has been going on for decades. And also they're using their proxies outside of Iran. And Tehran itself is never held accountable for those things. You know, and Tehran doesn't care if their proxies are paying the price, the price if the proxies are getting attacked. As long as the regime itself doesn't feel threatened or feel that others are afraid of them, then they will continue doing those actions. So look at the situation, at least since October of last year until now. How many, you know, threats directly or indirectly the Iran regime has done, and, you know, firing missiles, getting, you know, their proxies, Houthis in the Red Sea, targeting commercial ships. Look what they're doing in Syria, in Iraq, and you know, in Lebanon, all of that. Yeah. They have never been held accountable. So that's what they need to do.
So all of that is because they're doing all of these things as well because they're insecure?
Absolutely. The main driving force of the Iran regime's actions, whether inside Iran or outside of Iran, is all about their survival. This regime is vulnerable. They know it. The people of Iran have rejected this regime. So the only way they can survive is to step up repression against the very same population who are opposing them, but also using their proxies outside of Iran. And this way they can project power. You know, people may think, oh, the Iran regime, they have all these proxies and everything. They are powerful. That's not the case. This regime is not 10 feet tall. They're not doing any of these activities out of power. Rather, this is all from the position of weakness. They're vulnerable. They're paranoid about their future. That's why they're resorting to these actions. It's important to understand this because it will then allow you to take proper measures. You will see that if you take decisive actions against the Iranian regime, they back down. Remember when Qasem Soleimani was taken out, the terror master, the head of the Quds Force. It was taken out in 2020 by the United States with all the threats the regime did. For so long, they couldn't do anything. And they made all kinds of threats or anything like that, but it actually they were, nothing they could do in reaction to that. To the contrary, you saw the increasing protest inside the country. The argument at the time was that if you threaten the regime, the people will rally behind the flag in Iran. That never happened. To the contrary, under sanctions, under pressure against the regime, people were more encouraged to step up their opposition to the Iranian regime.
So what you're saying, and I just want to be clear about this, is that if the U.S. wants to send a message to Iran, it has to go after Iran, not its proxies, not only just its proxies, but it's got to do something for and to, or it's got to do something to Iran and the regime itself, correct?
Well, one thing I think has become very clear, at least since October 7th, that the head of the snake of war and terrorism in the region actually lies in Tehran. So what do you do with the head of the snake? You crush it. And of course, that's the responsibility of the people of Iran, not the outside world. But the outside world can hold the regime accountable, but also at the same time, provide room and space for the organized opposition to do what they're intending to do, to bring down the Ayatollahs. They need to stand on the side of the people of Iran who are legitimately fighting against the regime. They need to recognize the legitimacy of the fight against this regime by the Iranian people. That is missing. The US government, the Western nations, they all have to say very clearly that the people of Iran have the right, it's actually their duty, their right to overthrow this regime, to fight back, to push back the Revolutionary Guards, the repressive forces, in order to bring about change. That's the missing factor.
All right, so a couple more very quick things. The most important is, do you believe that the Ayatollahs, the leadership of Iran, and those folks who are behind essentially the organization of these militias and proxies, do you believe they should be targeted? Just like you were targeted, just like others have been targeted. Do you believe the US and the West should target these individuals?
Well, I'm not in a position to tell the, US government or other Western nations exactly what to do and what actions to take. I think, they can draft their own strategy. But one thing is very clear, that so long as they avoid holding the regime accountable for their crimes in order to target the regime in any way that they see appropriate, nothing is going to be resolved. And remember that, this is not something that just happened overnight. There is a trend of decades of opposition to the Iran regime by the people of Iran. But also listen to the US Congress, members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, both in the House and the Senate. They are calling for accountability. They're calling for foreign policy. They're calling for taking, decisive action against the Iranian regime. And of course, when, something like Qasem Soleimani was eliminated, the people of Iran endorsed it. We endorsed it because, what do you do with terrorists? What do you do with those who are, hurting peace, are the main obstacles to peace and security? You have to, remove them. And that's exactly what happened with Qasem Soleimani.
Okay. The very last thing, is there something you want to add that I haven't asked you about that you think is important?
I think the most important thing is that this is a very critical time, critical juncture. I think since October 7, pretty much the whole world has changed. All of the calculations anyone was doing before, they have to revisit their policies. New decisions must be made by Western capitals, whether in Europe or in the United States, and what they want to do with the epicenter of terror, with the head of the snake. And this is the time that is very critical, but also there is a tremendous opportunity out there. Despite all of the murder, all of the killings, all of the bloodshed, we have the opportunity to, by taking the right decisions, the right policies, to end all of this carnage once and for all. These violence and killings is not a permanent feature of that part of the world. That part of the world can see peace. It must be able to see peace. And this will only happen when the Ayatollahs are overthrown.
Alireza Jafarzadeh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You are one of the most effective speakers that I've ever spoken to when it comes to difficult issues like this. You speak specifically and directly and candidly about situations like this. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, JJ. And I appreciate the work you're doing, because your contribution, especially on national security matters, to policymakers, thinkers, members of Congress, whoever, specifically in Washington, D.C., is very valuable. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you from time to time. Appreciate it.